field goal. And Burrow keeps it. Joe Burrow might be a Heisman moment right there.
Back in coverage. Rule almost bobbled the snap. Now fires, and this one is intercepted. Given a second chance, Bonito makes the pick, and a takeaway of all things is going to seal a massive comeback victory for Oklahoma.
The Holyfield is just standing on the side.
Yes.
On first down from, gonna go deep. Got a man out there and get him. Dominique Blaylock, touchdown.
The playoff picture is finally starting to take shape around the country as we're starting to get down to the wire, getting close to rivalry week. Alabama has gone down to LSU a couple weeks ago. Penn State, Ohio State coming up this weekend. You're listening to the Playoff Committee. I'm Chas Messman alongside Ray Belkora. There were some great games last week, but we're going to start 2 weeks ago with arguably the biggest game of the season when the LSU Tigers defeated the Alabama Crimson Tide. Since then, even more has happened. Tua Tagovailoa has gone down, which looks like for the rest of the year. It doesn't look like he'll be able to play come bowl season with the dislocated hip. Really bad injury. He was screaming as he got carted off the field. Really brutal to see. However, in that game, Joe Burrow, in my opinion, solidified his Heisman. I mean, the guy was absolutely excellent. And obviously our player of the week will be for this past week. However, you have to give a shout out to Joe Burrow, who went 31 of 39 with 3 touchdowns, almost 400 yards passing and no picks.
Yeah, that was an incredible game, and it's unlike any LSU-Alabama game we've seen in that it was all about the offenses. Usually, I mean, that famous 2011, I believe, game of the century? 9-6. Yeah, it was a completely different sport this time around. Joe Burrow was fantastic. Tua tried his best to lead the team back. It feels like 2 months ago that game was. Now with the picture changing so much, Tua going down. But yeah, LSU, that kind of solidified their what has led to their number one spot in this week's rankings and Joe Burrow's Heisman campaign, as you said.
We'll get to it later, but obviously I've been a big advocate of the Tigers all season, especially over Ohio State, and for me, this just completely solidified it. But obviously, like I said, we're going to get into that as we get into the rankings and more playoff scenarios. So we're going to go into a little bit of last weekend's games. We'll start off with a team that was undefeated and was starting to finally pick up some traction, like, oh, maybe they're legit. Maybe they can actually make a playoff run and beat the Ohio State Buckeyes in a Big Ten championship game. However, the Iowa Hawkeyes kind of said, no, sir.
Yeah, and we've seen that time and time again as teams go on the road to Iowa with playoff hopes. And Iowa Iowa's a funny team because they can hang with anybody. They always have a good defense, always play low-scoring games. They can hang with anybody, and they lose to some teams they shouldn't. But it seems like every year a top 5 or 10 team loses at Iowa. And this year was no different as Minnesota took their first loss in an obvious letdown spot after a big win against Penn State. You wonder how much that took out of them, both physically and emotionally. But, Iowa just controlled much of the game. It was low scoring, as we said. They jumped out to a 13-0 lead after the first quarter. For Minnesota, Tanner Morgan continued playing well. He threw for 368 yards and a touchdown. But Minnesota overall couldn't win on the road.
Yeah, and Iowa jumped out to an early lead in that game. They put up 2 quick touchdowns, and the Golden Gophers they weren't able to come back from it. It's a testament to Iowa. They're a well-coached football team. With that being said, I don't think they're a great football team, and I think this exposed a lot of flaws within PJ Fleck's team. Yes, he's done a really good job with that program. However, are they at a national title competing stage yet? I think this game proved that they are not. Another crazy game that same weekend was the Baylor-Oklahoma game. Baylor, another team like Minnesota, complete turnaround from a couple years ago. Matt Rule has done a phenomenal job. Only a couple years ago, they went 0-12 in the regular season. So that's just testament to the job that Rule and his staff have done in Waco. With that being said, it was the complete opposite, if you will, in terms of comeback. Baylor jumped out to that 28-3 lead early in that game, and then Jalen Hurts and the Oklahoma Sooners rolled back and took that game away. And at the end of the time, wouldn't you just know it, a defensive play sealed the win for Oklahoma.
Yeah, and that I was looking forward to that game all day. That was the game that I thought, along with the Minnesota game, would have the most intrigue because it's these undefeated teams really being tested. And I mean that stadium in Waco was buzzing. Baylor jumped out to a 28-3 lead, but it still didn't seem insurmountable because Oklahoma, you always know how quickly they can score. And when they made it 28-10, I almost thought that there was a 50% chance they would come all the way back, and they did.
You know they can put up the points. It's just
Yeah.
whether or not they can hold the other team long enough for them to score the amount of points when there's still time on the clock.
Yeah, I still can't believe their loss at Kansas State. For their loss.
That was
on
a
the
crazy.
season.
It was another one of those games where they fell behind early,
Yeah.
and I guess in that it just didn't fall their way. I mean, the onside kick, we all saw it. They recovered it.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, they might have been a half yard away from winning that football game and being an undefeated team who are one of the front runners for this playoff. With that being said, we're going to get into the players of the week, and this segues nicely into mine, and mine's Jalen Hurts. The guy was 30 of 42, 297 yards passing and 4 touchdowns, and then on the ground, he had 114 yards on 27 carries. The guy was absolutely phenomenal. Had Joe Burrow not been having the season that he's having, I think Jalen Hurts is a runaway Heisman candidate. He still might win the Heisman. We can't, I wouldn't say Joe Burrow's completely locked it up. However, Jalen Hurts, the guy is just, you can't not root for this guy.
Yeah, that was a phenomenal performance. His story from Alabama to now being in a completely different offense where he can run the ball more and he's become a better passer. He's just made tremendous strides in his game.
One thing that people were discussing prior to the season was whether or not he'd want to make an emphasis on his ability to throw the ball from the pocket, to impress NFL scouts more. And he just hasn't done that. Lincoln Riley's done a phenomenal job play calling. We all know he's one of the best play callers, probably the best play caller in all of football, college or NFL. But he's also utilized what makes Jalen Hurts special at the college football level is his legs. I mean, the guy squats like 700 pounds. I mean, he is a powerful runner, and it is a big-time asset for this Sooner offense, and they've completely taken advantage of it.
Yeah, I mean, Oklahoma is just a factory. I mean, everybody talks about it, but we're
2 straight
going from
Heismans,
Baker to Kyler now
2
to
straight
Jalen
number
Hurts.
ones.
Yeah, it's just really impressive what they've done on the offensive side. And this year there was a lot of talk that their defense was better, and I mean, it's hard not to be better than they were last season because last season they were just in ridiculous shootouts. But yeah, except for their loss at Kansas State, I thought they've really impressed all season long.
And then going off of your point about the defenses, I'm just looking it up real quick, but they have the 36th ranked defense in the entire country, which is vastly improved from last year when a year ago they were in the hundreds.
Yeah, it's tremendously improved their chances to win games, and even compete in games like Baylor, where they fell behind by so much. Old Oklahoma defense, Baylor would keep scoring, but this year they were able to stop Baylor. I don't think they scored a point in the second half.
Another great coaching shot at Alex Grinch, the defensive coordinator of the Sooners. But we're going to move on to your player of the week. And you went for a little bit of a different route. Not so much of a close game between two top teams. You went with another guy who wanted a blowout.
Yeah, I went kind of outside the box here with Tyler Huntley of Utah. He was incredibly efficient, going 14 of 18 for 335 yards and 2 touchdowns. Not insane numbers, but I just kind of wanted to talk about Utah in general and give a shout out to him because I feel like they're flying pretty under the radar here. Oregon's getting a lot more of the talk in the Pac-12 in terms of contenders and impressive teams, and I feel like Utah has quietly just blown out opponent after opponent, especially at home, since that USC loss earlier in the year.
Yeah, there's no denying that USC loss was a bad loss. However, that loss just keeps looking better and better. Obviously, with USC, while they are a really poorly coached team and they have a lot of injuries, I mean, they have one running back, I think, on their roster. Amon-Ra St. Brown's been taking a lot of snaps in the backfield the last couple weeks. Primarily, even last week against ASU, I think he had like 4 or 5 carries. But this Utah football team's legit. We all know it. We'll get into that. Their defensive line, their pass rush is elite. at times Tyler Huntley, at least I feel like he's the one actually holding them back at times, just because, yes, he's efficient and he can use his legs at times, but he's not the type of guy that's going to carry you to a win.
Yeah, they don't have an explosive offense.
Exactly.
But their defense is so good that they have the ball a lot, and there are a lot of opportunities for them to score points. And this week, he really took advantage of those opportunities.
All right, yeah. Now we're going to get into the rankings. With the College Football Playoff official committee rankings coming out, we're really going to focus more on the playoff now. We did a little bit last episode, so we're not going to focus so much on 25 through 11. We're going to really focus on the top 10, talk through scenarios and why which teams should be in the playoff and why, especially now that their resumes are starting to become complete. Obviously, they won't be completely complete because, we still have rivalry weekend and conference championships and all that. However, we're going to start at 25. At 25, we have the Texas A&M Aggies, 24 Iowa State, 23 Oklahoma State, 22 USC, and 21 SMU. Ray, which of those teams really stands out to you?
Iowa State beat Texas last weekend. I thought that was an impressive win.
They are one of the most disappointing teams this
season. I don't
season.
know what to make of Texas because it seems like they played tight with LSU, but they have some weeks like the Kansas week where they barely beat Kansas, and then now they lost to Iowa State. I don't know what to make of them, but I was impressed by Iowa State in that game. I was also impressed by USC, who took advantage of Cal, lost their quarterback again, and they just blew them out of the water. So those are the teams that kind of stand out to me, and I believe those two were both unranked last week.
With Iowa State, they're a good football team. They obviously have some flaws. They lost a couple of games that they probably shouldn't have. You can just look back to the Iowa game with one of the most bonehead plays I've ever seen with that muffed punt where they just kind of ran into each other. Mm-hmm. Matt Campbell's a phenomenal head coach. I think he's one of the most underrated in the entire country. Brock Purdy's third in the nation in leading and passing. Only Joe Burrow and Anthony Gordon of Washington State are above him. So Purdy's been absolutely balling out. He's only a sophomore, so he's only going to get better. And then USC is one of those teams that it's a what if.
Yeah,
that's the one question.
They always have so much talent.
They have talent. I think this year it's coaching and injuries that have really hurt them. I mean, you think about this. They lost JT Daniels in the first game of the season. It's all these what ifs. What if JT Daniels never got hurt? What could he do with Michael Pittman Jr., Tyler Vaughns, Amon-Ra St. Brown in his second year, in college? Now that he finally had the experience and learned last year as a freshman, what could he have been? He looked great in that opening game, and then he tore his ACL. What if Slovis hadn't gone down against Utah? Yeah. Would they still beaten them? Would they have lost to BYU?
Yeah, Slovis looks great. You wonder if he might even keep his job next year. I mean, I don't know what's going on there.
It's going to be a competition. With that being said, I think JT Daniels, in terms of talent-wise, is a step above him. Mm-hmm. And if JT can figure it out and he gets healthy, I think Daniels would win that job. With that being said, you never know what's going to happen. Slovis came out of nowhere. The guy's got an absolute cannon. So, we'll see. But there's no denying the talent on that USC team. It's just whether or not they have the coaching to do it. And I think Clay Helton's job is really hanging by a thread. They've lost a couple of games that coaching has really made a big impact on and hurt them in, not just this year, but in years previous, even years where they were really good with the likes of Sam Darnold. But, we'll see what happens with that. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets the axe following this year. They got a new president, a new AD. Mm-hmm. And, there's some guys like Urban Meyer, news speculating that maybe he'll be the one to take the reins. So, yeah. Anything about that? We'll move on to the top 20 now. Cincinnati at 20, 19 Boise State, 18 Memphis, 17 Iowa, and number 16 Notre Dame. Couple Group of 5 teams, some of the better teams of the Group of 5. SMU and Shane Buechele putting up lots of points in the American Conference. Luke Fickell's team only one loss this year, the only against the number. We're not going to reveal where they're at in our rankings, but in the college football playoff rankings, Ohio State's ranked number 2 in the country, and they've just been blowing out everybody. So Cincinnati's definitely a good football team. Boise State, another one of those teams that's having a decent year, but there's nothing really special about them. Memphis and Brady White, a former ASU quarterback, putting up some points. So the American Conference is probably going to be one of those underrated but fun last couple weeks in the entire country as all these teams with like 1 or 2 losses finally go at it.
I've been really impressed by Memphis. I can't say I've watched all of Memphis's games, but I did watch their game versus SMU. That was a big primetime game, full stadium, and that was a great game. They looked really good in that game. And they're the most impressive group of 5 team. That's just my opinion.
Shane Buechele got over 3,000 yards passing, 28 touchdowns on the year, the Texas transfer. They got Navy this week, who did not look very good against Notre Dame. However, we all know Navy can, be tough against anyone. So that'll definitely be one of those underrated low-key games, to watch. We'll get to that a little bit later, though. 16 Notre Dame, the team that beat out Navy. Obviously, they've had a couple bad losses. The Georgia loss was, a close one, and for a second it thought they'd win. However, they just did not show up to play against Michigan. That was a really, really bad performance. But, they were in a playoff the year ago for a reason. They're a good football team. Brian Kelly's a good head coach. I like Ian Book as a quarterback.
Yeah, their Navy win was very impressive. I mean, I started watching that game, and then I didn't have to watch it anymore because they kind of just established their presence, and it didn't seem like Navy really had a chance. Their loss to Michigan, that was the game where it was just pouring rain. It was in the middle of a storm. You can't put that performance on a storm. I think Michigan turned the corner a little bit in that game.
They've absolutely turned the corner.
In the second half of
team
Penn
that we
State,
saw against Notre Dame was not the team we saw against Wisconsin.
Yeah, but that was still a shocking defeat shocking that Notre Dame got defeated like they did versus Michigan.
Absolutely. They held the Navy 3 points in the first half, and they put up 38. So it's 38-3 at halftime. There was no chance for anyone else. Michigan, a team who's actually we have ranked a couple of spots ahead. We had Auburn at 15, but we'll just go right into Michigan, who we have at 14. They looked really impressive against Michigan State in what was probably Shea Patterson's best game as a Wolverine. He was 24 of 33, 384 yards, and 4 touchdowns. We're finally starting to see that offense that their offensive coordinator, Gaddis, was trying to implement. It took a while. They didn't really have an identity, but I feel like now they're starting to. With all those big wide receivers, Donovan Peoples-Jones, Tariq Black, that they have, it's finally starting to take shape. It's just a shame that it's taking shape a little bit late. With that all being said, Jim Harbaugh's job might be coming down to the big one a couple weeks from now.
Yeah, and I'm curious to see, assuming Ohio State beats Penn State, what the spread will be in that Michigan game, because it's in Ann Arbor, right?
I believe so.
It is. I'm pretty sure it's.
No, yes, it is, because last year they lost in the horseshoe.
It's in Ann Arbor. Michigan has turned the corner. Ohio State has looked like a completely dominant team. So I don't know what that spread will be like, but that will be interesting to see, because Michigan, completely different team than Wisconsin, than when they lost to Wisconsin in that blowout. And I think they could spoil the party for Ohio State. Now, even if they beat Ohio State, I think Ohio State's playoff hopes are still alive.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Especially if they're a one-loss Big Ten champion.
Yeah.
They're pretty...
I think they'd be...
I think they have a really good shot of still getting in. Especially with Tua Tagovailoa's injury, that really hurts a one-loss Alabama team that probably won't be in the playoff.
Yeah, I don't think
so. Ohio State does probably have a little bit of leeway in terms of whether or not they can drop a game down the stretch, especially to a decent team like Michigan. But, you never know with all these teams, because there are a lot of good football teams right now. It goes about 8 teams deep, maybe even 10 teams deep, that still have a decent shot of getting into the college football playoff. If everything falls their way, you could still see a team like Minnesota or Penn State making it in. If they take care of business, they got a shot.
I'd say each of the top 10 has a path. Now, some they'd need help, like Alabama would need a lot of help, I think.
Because Minnesota would also need a lot of help. Even as a
Minnesota
one-loss
would
champion,
have to win the Big Ten championship.
they'd have to do that. I think they need a little bit of help too in front of them, because I don't know, aside from an Ohio State win.
If they beat Ohio State in the Big Ten championship, though, then I think they're in. They would have to beat Wisconsin to get there, which could be tough, which will be tough. But if they then beat Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game, which I don't think will happen, but if, I think they would be in, because that would.
Yeah,
be
that's
an
the thing.
impressive
Do
win.
you think that Minnesota stands a chance against Ohio State?
Very small. But I didn't think they
Bingo.
stood much of a chance against Penn State either.
Yeah, I mean it's fair. We'll definitely talk about these types of scenarios. Earlier, we kind of skipped over Auburn.
Mm-hmm.
We have them at 15 right now. They're another one of those teams that got down early in the game against Georgia. They're down 21-0 pretty quickly. However, they started to come back. Bo Nix started to look like maybe he's going to pull out the magic again. He's going to, they're come from behind win, do something special. He brought him back within one score, and then he just missed a layup. I mean, the 4th down and 3, very good play call by Gus Malzahn. They roll him out with a little halfback flat route. All he had to do is just drop it into his running back, and they have a 1st down, and they're in business. However, he just missed him.
Yeah, I'm not a big Bo Nix fan.
Really?
No. I think he's an okay quarterback. He is a freshman, so I'll give him that. He has time to grow. I do not all the hype for him after the Oregon game because of that game-ending drive where his receiver made a play to extend that drive. There was kind of a jump ball where if that's knocked away or something, we're looking at Oregon probably number 3 in the country. So it's wild to think about that. But he was not good in that Oregon game, but because he had a good last drive or two, everyone's like, oh, the legend of Bo Nix. And then as we've gone into SEC, he's been fine, but he hasn't been a star.
He's been up and down like you would have expected from a freshman.
And that's been Auburn kind of in general. They've beat all the teams they've supposed to have beaten. Oregon kind of the exception. That was kind of a coin flip at the time. And then they've lost to the cream of the crop in the SEC. So they've just been a pretty consistent team all the way around. And Bo Nix, I think next year, if he takes another level, if he gets to the next level where he can be more consistent and complete passes at a higher rate, then Auburn can make the jump because that defense is really good.
I'm on the other side. I love Bo Nix.
Okay.
I mean, obviously he's a true freshman. He's been up and down. His completion percentage is only at 57%. And some of the bigger games he's been around 50, maybe even a little bit under at times. Yeah. However, you just can't deny the fact that the guy is cool under pressure. When the moment's been biggest, aside from that last 4th down play, he's been great. Mm-hmm. The moment isn't too big for him. I mean, obviously 13 touchdowns to 6 interceptions isn't great, but like I said, he's a true freshman playing in some of the most hostile environments in all of football. You can't not be impressed with the guy. I love him. I think in the next couple of years, we have a future Heisman possibility. I think Auburn is set up to be very, very good down the line. They have some pretty good recruiting classes coming in. And then their D-line is legit. They got a top 5 pick on there. They can really get after the quarterback. So it's a very good team. They're probably the best 3-loss team in the entire country. It's just playing in the SEC West, a lot similar to Texas A&M. It's tough when you have to go against the likes of LSU and Alabama. When, you got 2 top 5 teams with amazing quarterbacks and amazing defenses with NFL players just all over the field, it's tough.
Yeah, Bo Nix, I will say, has an opportunity to gain some respect from me when they play Alabama. Because I feel like that game is pretty winnable for Auburn. It's at Auburn, I believe.
I believe so, yeah.
Yes, it is.
It's at Jordan Hare.
Yeah. So, yeah, because the Georgia game was home, too. So, yes, it's at Auburn. Oklahoma's going to be without Tua. They're going to have Mac Jones, who knows what we'll see from him. But I think, and Alabama's defense is not that good. So I think the bar for Bo Nix in that game should be like 27 points. And if they do that, I think they might win the game.
That's fair, yeah. No. And that will be, it's the Iron Bowl. Anything can happen in the Iron Bowl. We've seen Auburn teams win off of a crazy kickback return. We see in rivalry games, anything can happen. Mm-hmm. It's cliche, however, it's true. Mm-hmm. We're going to move on a little bit higher. We talked about Auburn 15, Michigan at 14. A little bit above that before we'll get into the top. We'll go through 11, and then we'll talk about the top 10 on its own. 16, we had Notre Dame. 15, Auburn. 14, Michigan. 13, Baylor. 12, Wisconsin. Number 11, Florida. Another of these teams that good but flawed. Look at a team like Baylor. they'd beaten everybody, and then when they came up against a really good opponent in Oklahoma, they couldn't get it done. Charlie Brewer had the ball in his hands, down 3, and he made 2 bonehead plays, and the second one cost him the game with that interception. Wisconsin, Jonathan Taylor's amazing. I mean, the guy just broke the record for most career rushing yards through your junior season. He's an all-time great college back. You just can't deny it. Maybe he doesn't get the love he should in terms of all-time greats. However, they really struggle throwing the ball down the field. If you get them to 3rd and long, they're in real trouble. Jack Cohn, while he's been able to be efficient and at times be able to complete passes in play action, you look at the Michigan game, he did a really good job of that. However, at times, consistently, it's been the biggest problem for Wisconsin over the years.
Yeah.
Is they don't really have a quarterback that can make plays, especially if you get down in a game.
Yeah, I feel like Wisconsin, I kind of talked about Iowa in the same way earlier. I feel like Wisconsin is just always a slightly better version of Iowa in terms of they're always in the game. They have a good defense that will keep them in the game, and their offense can struggle to be explosive. Now, Jonathan Taylor is kind of the wild card in that he can break off a big run that can change the game. But Wisconsin, yeah, I think that they're kind of on the verge of being between good and great, because the loss to Ohio State, I mean, that's perfectly excusable. Ohio State is phenomenal. The loss to Illinois was shocking.
There's no denying that is probably the worst loss of the season.
Yeah.
It is bad. And the Ohio State loss doesn't sound bad on the surface, but the way they lost that game was bad.
Yeah.
Like, the second half, they were basically it was men against boys.
Yeah.
And going off Jack Cohn, he's averaging 7.9 yards to completion. Their backup, Graham Mertz, when he's gone, has averaged 7.3. It's just... And compare that to a guy like Tua, who averages almost 20 at times. I mean, obviously I'm not saying Jack Cohn is anywhere near Tua or he has the weapons that Tua has. But in terms of explosion and what you can do and, score quickly, especially if you're down, if you get up on Minnesota or on Wisconsin, there's a real good chance that they're not going to be able to come back from that game.
Yeah.
Number 11, Florida. Another one of those what-if teams, similar to the USC, is they lost Felipe Franks, and Kyle Trask, while he's done well, he doesn't really have that it factor that Felipe Franks did. For all Franks' inconsistencies, that guy could win you a football game with his legs or his arm. I mean, you just look at the Michigan game last year in the bowl game. The guy can make plays, and he can carry the team when he needs to be. With that being said, while he might win you a game, he might lose you a game. Kyle Trask is just kind of more of a game manager, hand the ball off, distribute it, whereas Franks is more of your mercurial baller, if you will.
Yeah, I actually think Florida is one of the better teams in this group. When you look at their losses, LSU, they were in that game until the end. And then they lost to Georgia by 7. So they've kind of been in or won every game. They completely dominated Missouri, who has been one of the most underwhelming teams of the season, I've felt. I thought Missouri would be better than they are. I think they're 5-5 right now, but they only put up 6 points on Florida. Florida won easily, 23-6.
Kelly Bryant not quite having the season he would have liked.
Yeah, and he's had some health problems too.
Yeah.
But I thought that team in general would be better. And they'll close out versus Florida State after a bye this week. So I think Florida has a real shot of ending the season in the top 10.
They really do, and a lot of that is based around their defense. They have an elite pass rush. I don't know if it's quite on the level of an Ohio State or Utah. With that being said, they have the 13th ranked defense in the entire country. They've only given up 17 touchdowns all year.
Wow.
It's impressive. Will Muschamp, no, it's not Will Muschamp anymore. Excuse me. Dan Mullen has done a pretty good job there. It's only year 1. I think that they're really going to improve down the road, especially next year getting Felipe Franks back if he's able to recover from that. And if he's not, Kyle Trask and Emory Jones coming back with playtime will only improve. So Florida is a good football team. It's just they play a really tough schedule, and there are better teams in the SEC than them and better teams around the country. Now we're going to get into the top 10 of our rankings. I'll read our rankings. I'll read the college football playoff top 10. They're very similar. I think it's pretty self-explanatory that down the road that the resumes are starting to really take form, and you really start to realize who's the good teams and who hasn't, as you're starting to play like 9, 10, 11 games at this point in the season. But anyway, we'll start with the 10 rankings for the show. I'll give the college football playoff 10 rankings, or top 10, and then both Ray and I will give you guys our top 10. So for our show's top 10, the podcast show's top 10, at number 10, we have Minnesota. At number 9, Penn State. Number 8, Oklahoma. Number 7, Utah. Number 6, Oregon. Number 5, Alabama. And then the 4 teams that we had in the playoff, number 4, Georgia. Number 3, Clemson. Number 2, Ohio State. And number 1, LSU. The playoff committee had Minnesota at 10, Oklahoma at 9, Penn State at 8, Utah at 7, Oregon at 6, Alabama at 5, and the same top 4, and actually top 6, really, Georgia 4, Clemson 3, Ohio State 2, and LSU 1. Ray, obviously very, very similar. Mm-hmm. What'd you have?
I had Minnesota 10, Penn State 9, Oklahoma 8. I thought that comeback was impressive enough to move them up to 8. Oregon 7. I had Utah 6. I flipped those two from most people. Alabama 5. Georgia 4. Clemson 3. Ohio State 2. And LSU number 1.
Okay. Yeah, I see what you're saying there. For me, I had Florida at 10, so I had them above Minnesota. Penn State 9. Oklahoma 8. 7, I had Utah. Alabama 6, 5, I had Oregon above them. Number 4, I had Georgia. Number 3, Clemson. Number 2, Ohio State. And number 1, LSU. We'll start off with number 10, Minnesota. Obviously coming off that Iowa loss, not a great look for PJ Fleck's boys. But aside from that game, they've been rowing the boat, if you will, all season. And they're a good football team, but like we said earlier in the show, there's something missing. And we did have them behind Penn State, who we had at 9. Penn State actually beat them. And for me, I'm usually a big proponent of...
Minnesota beat Penn State.
Yes, Minnesota beat them. I'm usually a big proponent of head-to-head has to matter. So had this been who's going to the playoff between Penn State or Minnesota, obviously Penn State, in my opinion, would be the choice. However, I think that Penn State's just a better football team.
Yeah, I do too. And Minnesota has just... It's hard to say because they've exceeded expectations so much this season. Now, the majority of that was on an easy schedule. But they took care of business. And then against Penn State, they're like, okay, here's where they're put in their place. And no, they beat Penn State. And rightfully so, they rose in the rankings. And then the very next week, they had at Iowa. And that's one of the toughest road games in the Big Ten.
Especially coming off of an emotional win,
yeah.
A close win against a team who was, at the time, ranked number 4 in the country.
And Minnesota kept it close in that game. But losing at Iowa is going to drop you in the rankings, especially when you only have one. They have one great win, but it's also their only really solid win.
Yeah, exactly. No other team on that schedule, we're looking at it right now, is just relevant. I mean, who's their next best win against? Purdue, and that was only a 7-point win?
Might be Illinois.
Exactly. It might be Illinois at a 40-17 margin of game score. I'm not as high on Penn State as the committee was, or as a lot of people are. I'm not completely sold on them. I'll get into what I think is going to happen this weekend, but Sean Clifford's just not Trace McSorley. McSorley's dearly missed. They don't have a Saquon Barkley. While KJ Hamler is a great player, there's only so much you can do from the wide receiver position and not having the ball in your hands every down.
They're going to have their hands full this weekend with Ohio State. I think that, we'll get into that game later, but Penn State has an opportunity here to jump right back up the rankings if they can beat Ohio State in Columbus.
And if they're able to beat Ohio State on the road, it's going to look pretty darn good for that Minnesota Golden Gopher team. So there's definitely still a route for both these teams to make the playoff. Penn State, if they beat Ohio State and win the Big Ten championship, they're right back in that conversation of one of the 4 teams going to the playoff. Minnesota, if they're able to beat Wisconsin down the road and they're able to beat Ohio State or Penn State, whoever they do end up facing in the Big Ten championship game, there's a route for them to the playoff. 2 more teams at 6 and 7, Oregon, Utah. 2 teams that definitely both are not out of it. It's looking like they're going to meet in the Pac-12 championship game. I think Oregon's a little bit of a step above just based on what they can do offensively. I think Justin Herbert is obviously in a different bracket of quarterback than Tyler Huntley. Tyler Huntley, while he's efficient, Justin Herbert's going to be a first-round pick in the NFL draft pretty soon. So there's a lot of discrepancy in that aspect. However, they both have good defenses. Utah, we've talked about it earlier. Their defense is elite. They're the number 3 defense in the entire country. They can absolutely get after the quarterback. We all saw what they did to Arizona State, basically just stopping anything they wanted to do. Yeah. ASU got the ball inside the 30-yard line 3 times, I believe, in that game, and they got 3 points out of it. Let that sink in. 3 points. 2 of them, they were in the red zone. They're dominant.
Yeah, they're dominant against the run. They just kind of suffocate you. And, both Utah and Oregon, I think, are, even though I rank them behind Alabama, I think both of them have a better chance than Alabama to make the playoff, because Alabama, unless something crazy happens where LSU loses a game that it really shouldn't, is not going to make the SEC championship game and get that opportunity that Utah and Oregon will to have that one last point on the resume of a top 10 win.
This is a game that we'll, see play out, hopefully. It's looking like it's very likely this is the game that we'll see play out in the Pac-12 championship. So the winner of that game will really be setting themselves up for a good spot, or a good shot, if you will, in the college football playoff come January. For me, I just think Oregon's a better football team. Oregon still plays defense. They're the number 14 defense in the entire country. They've only given up 15 defensive touchdowns all season. Justin Herbert, we all know what he can do. Like we said before, the guy can make any throw. He's going to be a first-round pick for a reason.
Yep.
He's improved a lot this season compared to last. His efficiency has gone up to 2,600 passing yards, 28 touchdowns with a QBR of 74.8. I believe he only has 3 interceptions on the season. So he's definitely been very, very good. His rating's at 167.7. And their offensive line, I think, is the difference. They have one of the best offensive lines in the entire country. They went toe-to-toe with Auburn, who was a healthy defensive line, and their defensive line is one of the best in the country.
And Oregon was hurt in that game, too. They
exactly.
had some receivers out. And it's so interesting in college football how there's no real preseason, and those 2 teams just get thrown into that top 15. It was at least a top 20 matchup at the time. Now it would be top 15. And they just have to go at it just off a month of practicing against themselves. And so, while at the same time, like, you have to pay attention to those games, you can't say Oregon is the same team now that they were Labor Day weekend.
No, they weren't, and they're a lot better, especially at the skill positions, even with the loss of possibly their best receiver, who's actually a tight end, Jacob Breland. At the time of his injury, he was the leading receiver. He's got 405 receiving yards and 6 touchdowns. They've lost him for the year. However, lots of other guys have stepped up. Micah Pittman Jr. is namely one of them, the brother of USC wide receiver Michael Pittman Jr. Johnny Johnson is now almost at 500 yards. Jalen Redd is at 7 touchdowns. They have a running back in C.J. Verdell who's very good. Utah's got a good running back in Zach Moss. He's their all-time leading rusher. So both of these teams are very, very much still in the playoff conversation, But for me, where the difference is in the quarterback position and then in offensive line play.
I can't wait to see Herbert go up against that Utah defense. That's going to be really
NFL
interesting
scouts
to
will
see.
have their eyes on that to see if Herbert really can take the pressure, because Utah's going to give you the amount of pressure that you'll see at the next level. Bradley and the boys can get after the quarterback. Like, they get after you, they get after you fast. Their defensive line is up there with the best in the entire country. They are up there with the likes of Alabama, Clemson, LSU. It's just that their offense, exactly, Florida, Auburn, those teams, their defensive line can go toe-to-toe in the trenches with anybody in the entire country. It's just whether or not they can put up enough points on offense to where their defense can hold it against a great offense.
Yeah.
Which is going to be a big test against a team like Oregon. Right above Oregon, we had Alabama. Obviously, they lost to LSU, but the biggest thing for them, and actually why I had Oregon above them, was the loss of their quarterback, Tua Tagovailoa, to that hip injury, which, again, was brutal. It's just really, really sad to see a player like that go down to injury in that fashion. Obviously, you want to see him on the field doing what he loves and doing what he does best, and that's slinging it around to all those receivers. I mean, Alabama offensively with Tua was fun to watch. I mean, look at that LSU Florida, or when they were down to LSU trying to come back, he was just slinging it all over the place, chucking bombs to those receivers. And with Mac Jones coming back, I mean, could you ask for a better set of offensive weapons than what Mac Jones will be coming into? Think about it. He's got four NFL wide receivers. 4.
Yeah,
I mean, these dudes are just crazy good. He's got a great running back in Najee Harris, who had a phenomenal game last week. Jerry Jeudy's probably the best receiver in the entire country.
I think so.
Then you got Henry Ruggs. Who else? Devonta Smith, right? No, yeah, Devonta Smith. And then Jalen Waddle, the guy that took the pump back. So he can sling it to – there's so many weapons.
And I forget who they have this week, but it's one of those small schools that the SEC
It's
always
Cupcake
plays.
Week, and it's Cupcake Week in the SEC.
Yeah, so they basically have a bye week to get him ready for Auburn with a scrimmage basically in the middle of it on Saturday. So I think he's set up as well as you could be to succeed in that game. Now, I don't know if he will because it's still a tough atmosphere on the road in Jordan-Hare and a tough defense to play. But he has the weapons. He's going to have 2 weeks to prepare. I can't wait for that game as well.
And like you said, they got a good defense. But with all these weapons, he can throw the ball. But with Najee Harris in the backfield, if stuff starts to go a little bit crazy, he can always just hand the ball off. They'll be able to pick up some chunk yardage, and they'll be able to calm his nerves a little bit. And when you're at Alabama, you go to Alabama to play in these football games. You go to Alabama to play in the Iron Bowl.
And Nick Saban knows that they might have to make a statement in that game to get some consideration from the committee. So if there's an opportunity for him to run up the score, he's going to take it. And Auburn's going to be a challenge. I think that Alabama can win that game. I would feel a lot more confident, obviously, if Tua was in it, but I think they have to win it by 15 to 20 points to feel like they have a realistic shot at getting the 4th spot.
Yes, while you say that, LSU and Georgia will probably play each other they are going to play each other in the SEC championship game, and one of those teams will go down. So if LSU beats Georgia, which I think will happen because I believe LSU is the best team in the entire country, Alabama might slide in there above Oregon. And had they had Tua Tagovailoa, had they still had Tua, I think that might be the most likely outcome. Would be Alabama sliding in right over Oregon, Utah, Oklahoma, all those teams.
Alabama just doesn't have an impressive win. Now Auburn would be that, but I mean, I guess you could say the same kind of about Oregon until they play Utah.
But you say they didn't have an impressive win, but when Alabama, they were blowing out everyone similarly to the way that Ohio State was. It's just without their best player and arguably one of the best players in the entire country, you have to take a hit from that. You can't ignore the fact that they lost their most important player, the guy that's won them a national championship.
Now, the scenario where everyone in the kind of 6 to 10 range, the scenario that everyone does not want to see is Georgia beating LSU in the SEC championship, because I think LSU would still be in. So in that case, both of them, if LSU goes undefeated, having the resume that they do right now, which is by far the best resume in the country, and then they lose to Georgia in the SEC championship, I think both of those two will be in. And then likely, if it holds up, Ohio State and Clemson. And then the Pac-12 is out, and the Big 12 is out.
Yeah, and you look at a team like Clemson,
And
their schedule is so weak, and they haven't been overly impressive, but they've taken care of business. And we always try and say, oh, just focus on this year. But, like, it seems like whenever the conversation is, well, I mean, they won the national championship last year. We know what they can do. And when you look at the eye test, you see, oh, Trevor Lawrence, Travis Etienne, all those guys. I mean, the receivers they have, Justin Ross, T. Higgins, Amari Rodgers. You just look and you're like, oh, they're Clemson. But they haven't really done anything impressive. Their best win is Texas A&M, who I actually think is a very good team. They're ranked 25th in our rankings. Another one of those teams that's hurt by being in the SEC West.
yeah, Texas A&M, one of those teams that has won the games they should win and lost the games that they've been underdogs in. Clemson, I don't know what to make of them. I'm not saying they don't deserve to be the third ranked spot, but they haven't really proven anything to me yet, except based on what we know Clemson is in this era of college football. And what we know Trevor Lawrence is, and that's probably the best NFL draft prospect in
Since
years
Andrew Luck.
Yeah, it could be.
He hasn't had the best season in the world.
Not
However,
this year,
he hasn't
but
had
the
to.
Scouts,
He hasn't had to.
Yeah, and they'll end with at South Carolina next weekend. That shouldn't be too tough. Although we saw Georgia, what happened to them when they went to South Carolina.
So yeah, it's not going to be necessarily an easy game. It's a South Carolina State rivalry, if you want to say that. But you can't deny they're a good football team, and if they take care of business, they're gonna be in the college football playoff.
I will say they are incredibly hurt by the ACC being
Awful.
one of the worst. I'd say the worst.
It's the worst Power 5.
The worst edition of a Power 5 conference I've seen in years. I mean, even when the Pac-12 was getting knocked all over.
They didn't have a Clemson, but the teams were better.
Yeah, Clemson is the only team ranked in the top 25 by the committee, at least.
Everyone is
and I think
bad.
There's no one. I mean, who are they going to play in the ACC championship?
Their toughest
Pitt,
game
maybe?
was North Carolina, and while North Carolina could have won that game, they didn't.
Yeah. They
didn't win. Clemson won.
Yeah, North Carolina had one play, a 2-point conversion, where if they got it, they would have won. But Clemson held them.
Right before we get into game picks and maybe a couple mock scenarios, LSU, Ohio State. It's been a big argument around the country. We have LSU, both of us, and the show's rankings have them at 1. The playoff committee has them at 1 above Ohio State, and I think it's completely right. I think LSU is over the entire season has been the best team in the country. They by far have the most impressive resume. The Alabama win is the most impressive win of the year. Joe Burrow has been the best player in the country, at least offensively. Chase Young's got an argument that he's been the best defensive player. But Ohio State just doesn't have that. They don't have those marquee wins. Yes, they've blown out everybody. However, they've blown out everybody, but they haven't really blown out anyone who's legit, if that makes sense. They don't have that Auburn. They don't have a team. Yes, we have Wisconsin ranked above Auburn and Michigan, and probably they'll have both those teams beaten, but I can't confidently say that those teams would beat Auburn. I know for a fact that neither of those teams would beat Alabama, Tua or no Tua.
LSU plays Arkansas this weekend. If Ohio State beats Penn State by 30 or 40 points, do you think they could move up to number 1 again?
Well, I mean, if LSU struggles against Arkansas and Ohio State beats Penn State, I think they definitely could jump them.
Yeah.
Should they? No, because Penn State is not Alabama.
Yeah, I don't think LSU will have any problems with Arkansas. I think that game will be over 5 minutes after it starts.
It's over at kickoff.
Yeah, but I could see how there's an argument for Ohio State at number 1. Nothing against LSU. Basically, in this scenario, I could see an argument for either side because Ohio State has just looked so dominant, but LSU has such an impressive resume that it's basically eye test versus resume. What do you want to base your rankings off of? And yeah, I think that in all likelihood these two might meet for the national championship.
They have 4 top 10 wins.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Ohio State maybe at the end will have that, but if LSU wins the Big Ten or the SEC championship, they'll have 5 top 10 or 5 top 10 victories on their resume. And when you have that, you have the guy that's probably going to win the Heisman Trophy. I mean, for me, it's not even close.
Okay.
From what I've seen so far, the eye test, it's not like they have just had these wins and just scraped by. Mm-hmm. They've been impressive in these games. The closest game you could probably say was the Auburn game.
Texas was close too.
Texas was close, yes, but that was right near. That was right at the beginning of the season. I think that team has improved. Joe Burrow has improved over the season, has gone along, and I mean, 3,600 passing yards, 38 touchdowns.
Yeah, he's the Heisman.
He's from an average. A average to a decent college quarterback to a first-round draft pick, possibly.
Yeah.
Let that sink in. I mean, going into the season, I thought, they got Joe Burrow back. He's a good quarterback. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is a good running back, and he's starting to really take form. He's got almost 1,000 yards in the season and 12 touchdowns. They got some wide receivers in Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson. So, I was like, okay, yeah, Joe Brady bringing in the spread. Coach O's, trying to finally get into the modern game, something that a team like Wisconsin probably should do. Wink, wink. But, yeah, I was like, okay, this is an LSU team. I think they can beat Alabama. And then they started to rattle off wins. And I was like, you know what? They are going to beat Alabama.
Yeah.
And they did. And that was in Alabama with Tua.
Yeah.
But we're going to get into some of the game picks now. We're going to start off with the game here in Tempe. It's the primetime game on ABC. The number 6 Oregon Ducks take on the 5-5 Arizona State Sun Devils. It's looking like Jaden Daniels is going to be all good to play this week.
Yeah, I think.
However, the knee injury a couple weeks ago held him out against USC. How do you see this game going? Is this a trap game?
It's a tricky game, I would say. I'd say it's a little tricky for Oregon. That being said, I would be surprised if it's close in the fourth quarter. If ASU is able to keep it close, I'd be surprised because that secondary can be a little soft at times for ASU, especially with the slant routes, and I feel like Herbert can just hit those slants. And we've seen ASU struggle offensively.
I think the difference in this game is going to be the fact that I think Verdell's going to go off. I think ASU can match up one-on-one with their wide receivers. They have 3 decent cornerbacks in Jack Jones, the USC transfer, who I've been really impressed with. I'm a huge fan of Jack Jones.
Yeah.
Chase Lucas and Kobe Williams. But, when they go zone or when teams try and ground and pound, they can't really do it, and they struggle with pass rush. So I agree with you. I think this game might be close because it's a home game for ASU, and ASU plays really well at home. With that being said, I think the Ducks get it done in Tempe. Moving on, TCU, Oklahoma. TCU is one of those teams, they've made it tough on a couple teams this year. They kept it really close with Baylor, took them to double overtime. Do you see Oklahoma tripping up here and basically ruining their chances at the playoff?
No, I see Oklahoma rolling here, continuing the momentum from the second half last Saturday. I don't think they'll have any problem with TCU. I expect them to put up 50 points and try make a statement because they're kind of in the same boat as Oregon and Utah, where they're kind of in that group after Alabama that has the opportunity to pass Alabama. And so I think that they have the opportunity to make a statement here, and I think they will.
Another one of the off-the-radar games. Indiana, Michigan. Indiana quietly has 7 wins. Obviously, they play in the weak side of the Big Ten. Their schedule's not great. However, they do have 7 wins. Peyton Ramsey.
Hung with Penn State.
They hung with Penn State. Peyton Ramsey's a decent quarterback. Do you see Michigan struggling? with Indiana at all?
I like Michigan by probably a touchdown in this game. I'm a little concerned. A Michigan player, I believe Shea Patterson, was talking about the Ohio State game already this week and said like, "Oh, this is our big opportunity on the season here to wreck Ohio State." And I was like, "Ooh, okay, Indiana, you have to go at Indiana this week. Maybe focus on that." I think this will be a low-scoring game. I think Michigan wins something like 21-14, 24-17, something like that.
I like Michigan too. I think it's going to be a little bit more high scoring based off what I've seen the last couple of weeks from Shea Patterson and that Michigan offense. I think they've really grown now into their own and finally starting to come out. So I think they're going to roll through this game, and I think they'll be ready to play in the big game against the Buckeyes a couple weeks from now. Georgia, Texas A&M. In this one, I like the Bulldogs. Yes, their offense has been a bit elementary. However, Kellen Mond at times I think has been up and down. And the one thing you can say about Jake Fromm is the guy's just consistent. They can run the ball with DeAndre Swift. I think they get it done. I think it's going to be another low-scoring game, probably like 24-17.
Yeah, Georgia does have some trouble closing out games, emphatically. Like, even when they still win, like Notre Dame and stuff, they get a little dicey towards the end. I think that A&M has the potential to keep it close, but I don't think they can in this scenario. I think that Georgia wins by more like 10 or 14.
The American Conference is definitely heating up this week and this year and overall. Number 25 SMU taking on Navy this week. Who do you like in that one?
I like SMU. That would be an upset, actually. Navy is favored by 3.5, but I think SMU can get the win in Annapolis. I've been impressed by Sonny Dykes' job. I was a fan of Cal when he was there, and he would get a little frustrating at times with the lack of defense they would play. But I've been impressed with how he's turned around SMU and made them into a top 25 team. I think they'll continue that and move to 10-1 on the season.
Good pick. I like the Mustangs in this one. Shane Buechele, Sonny Dykes. I see them rolling in this one. And now we got the big one. The headgear selection on College Game Day this Saturday. If you were Lee Corso, what type of headgear would you be putting on this weekend? The Penn State Nittany Lion or the Ohio State Buckeye?
The Ohio State Buckeye. I think that Ohio State is just too talented. And
they're favored by 18.5 points, which is a bit disrespectful to Penn State, being that they're ranked 8 in the country, but I kind of agree with the line. Yeah. I don't think they're that great of a football team.
I think it is a ton of points to be favored by. My gut tells me Penn State keeps it closer than 18.5. I feel confident in saying that Ohio State wins the game.
Would you say they cover the spread, or did you just say that?
Yeah, no, I don't. I would not bet on them to cover the spread. I'll say that.
I agree with you. If I were Corso, I'd be putting on that Buckeye head. Brutus. I mean, we're getting down to the wire. Yeah. The college football season is starting to come to an end. As crazy as that sounds. It's raining here in Tempe. Actually, it's hailing here in Tempe, so you really know winners around. College football's heating up. It's Cupcake Week in the SEC. Alabama's playing Western Carolina. Auburn's playing Samford. Not Stanford, Samford.
Yep. So,
we got some really good matchups, and then you got some bad ones. However, it's college football. Anything can happen. I'm excited for the ASU-Oregon game. I'll be in the stands. I'm sure you'll be in the stands.
I will be.
And then all of you and myself will be watching from the couch in these other games. Everyone, you can just relax. Saturday's on the way. It's going to be great. Making Saturdays great again, as we call it in my fraternity house. You're listening to the Playoff Committee. I'm Chas Messman alongside Ray Belkora. Enjoy. Peace!